Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, strap in, everyone. Today we are going deep on Black Power, a term that's, well, a lot more than just a slogan.
Definitely more than a slogan.
Yeah. Our source material is this podcast episode, Defining Black Power, a movement of many meanings.
From Mr. Hutchings History, right?
That's the one. And seriously, this deep dive is going to show us how Black Power represents like a whole bunch of different ideas and goals within the civil rights movement.
You know, one of the most fascinating things is how just this one phrase, Black Power, became both a rallying cry and something people really disagreed on.
Oh, absolutely.
It shows just how complex this period was, all the different viewpoints, even within the movement itself.
Yeah, it's like Black Power was this force everyone felt, but then they had totally different ideas about what to do with it.
Exactly.
And the episode really brings that out.
It does.
It all starts with this huge event, the Meredith March Against Fear back in '66. Can you kind of set the scene for us?
So James Meredith, the first Black student to go to the University at Mississippi, he's leading this march to get Black people registered to vote in the South. And then, bam, he's shot by a white supremacist.
It's just awful. It's hard to imagine the impact that must have had.
Oh, it was a major turning point. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, they all rushed to join the march. This amazing show of solidarity. And that's where Black Power, the slogan, is born.
Wow. I can practically hear it echoing in the streets. But it was Stokely Carmichael from SNCC who really put that phrase on the map, didn't he?
He did. During one of the speeches, he just electrifies the crowd with this call, Black Power. And it wasn't just words. It captured how frustrated young activists were. They felt change wasn't happening fast enough.
Yeah, like they were done waiting.
Exactly. They were ready for something bolder, something that put the power for change in their own hands.
This idea of taking control, of self-reliance, powerful stuff.
Powerful, but also, as the podcast makes clear, Black Power wasn't just one thing to everyone. It meant different things to different people, and that's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Like the Source podcast actually says, Black Power's strength and weakness was that nobody could completely define it.
Right.
It unified people, but then also led to these disagreements that split the movement up.
Definitely. Like you had some groups, for example, Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam,
Right.
who saw it as a call for Black supremacy.
Almost the opposite of what earlier civil rights leaders wanted.
Right.
The whole integration thing.
Their vision, you have to understand, it came from centuries of oppression. They wanted Black dominance over white people, a complete flip of the power structure.
Then on the totally other side, you have a guy like Nathan Wright. He's looking at Black Power through like a business lens.
Right. Wright believed in Black empowerment, but through economics, being self-sufficient. So Black-owned businesses, that kind of thing. That was his key to liberation.
Makes you think.
Yeah.
Even Richard Nixon, and he's a Republican president, he used that Black Power phrase when he talked about economic opportunities for Black communities.
He did. It's interesting, isn't it?
Wow. It's a phrase that really crossed those political lines.
It did.
But what about SNCC? They had a take on Black Power that was more, I don't know, in the middle.
Absolutely. Floyd McKissick, a big name in SNCC, he pushed back against the idea that Black Power automatically meant violence or keeping white people out.
Okay.
For them, it was more about political and economic independence, building up their own communities from within.
So less about taking power from others, more about building power for themselves.
That's a good way to put it.
And we got to talk about the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in Detroit. They took Black Power right into the factories and workplaces.
Their story's so important. It shows this wasn't just some theory. They were fighting for workers' rights. Changes in the factories, proof that Black Power meant stuff for everyday people's lives, their jobs.
It was about total liberation, not just one part of life.
Absolutely.
So we've got all these different interpretations: separatism, capitalism, cultural pride, labor rights. Man, it really is complex, this Black Power idea.
It is.
But how did those older civil rights leaders react? The ones who'd been fighting for integration, for peaceful protest. How'd they feel about this new, more radical energy?
Well, that's where we start to see some real clashes within the movement.
Ooh, okay, I'm ready for the drama. Tell me more.
For starters, guys like Roy Wilkins from the NAACP, they were deeply skeptical. He saw Black power as just another form of white supremacy, just as bad and dividing people.
Like it was creating the same problems it was trying to solve?
Precisely.
Right.
And even Martin Luther King Jr., while he understood the need for empowerment, he was worried about the violence it might lead to and the message it was sending.
It's such a strong phrase. I get how it could be taken the wrong way. There's a fine line between standing up for yourself and being aggressive.
Right. He famously said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that when you put Black and power together, it sounds like you're saying Black people should dominate. But even though he had doubts, King still tried to find a good way to look at Black power. He saw it as a way to build up racial pride and dignity, to make Black communities feel good about themselves, feel like they belonged.
It's interesting, right? You have these leaders who were at the front of the movement, and now they're trying to figure out this new direction, this new energy.
It just shows how much Black power shook things up in the civil rights movement. Everyone had to rethink their strategies and goals. It was a huge shift.
This is already so insightful, but I'm really curious about the cultural impact of Black power. It wasn't just about politics, right? It started a whole cultural awakening.
Oh, absolutely. Black power wasn't about changing laws. It was about changing minds and hearts.
Yeah.
It was about Black people taking back their identity and celebrating their culture.
That's what I really want to get into. How did Black power turn into a cultural movement?
That's a great question. And that's exactly where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we've talked about the politics, the economics, all that. But what really gets me is how Black power changed the culture. It wasn't just marching. It was about Black people taking back their identity, expressing pride in these totally new ways.
The amazing thing is how Black power went beyond just politics and became part of everything, everyday life, art, fashion, music, even education. It was like a whole new way of being, you know?
Yeah. The podcast talks about this explosion of Black cultural expression. Afros, African-inspired clothes, a whole new look that was about embracing Blackness, its beauty, its power. It must have felt like a revolution in itself, just that change.
It was a total rejection of what white society said was beautiful, this celebration of Black heritage. I mean, imagine how powerful that was to see yourself reflected in the culture, Black beauty being celebrated after, what, generations of being told to be ashamed of who you are?
It can be so empowering. Like saying, this is us and we're damn proud.
Exactly.
But this cultural impact, it wasn't just about looks, right?
No, not at all. One of the biggest things was this demand for Black studies programs in colleges all across the country.
Right. Students wanted to learn their own history, their culture, to see their own experiences in what they were being taught.
It was challenging that whole Eurocentric way of thinking that had been in colleges forever. And it wasn't just about adding a few Black history classes. It was about changing how knowledge was created, how it was shared.
Like taking back their intellectual heritage, saying, we belong here too in the world of ideas. What's interesting is how this push for Black studies wasn't just about education. It was about power.
You got it. It was about changing who had the power in academia, letting Black scholars speak, bringing in those perspectives that had been silenced for so long.
So Black power, it wasn't just a political slogan or about the economy. It fueled this whole cultural and intellectual awakening. It challenged everything about American society. It made people rethink what it even meant to be Black in America.
And that's why it's still so important. Even the New York Times back then said, nobody knows what Black power really means. Maybe that was the best part, that no one could really define it.
I see what you mean. People could put their own hopes and dreams onto it, shape it to fit their own idea of what liberation meant.
Cleveland Sellers, he was with SNCC, he said it perfectly. Black power meant everything to everybody. It was this fluid, adaptable idea that clicked with people from all walks of life.
It brought people together even while it was causing these debates, like a kaleidoscope, all these ideas constantly shifting, changing. But how do we even begin to understand all these different interpretations? How do we look at the legacy of Black power today, so many years later?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to really get it, we need to go beyond the 1960s and see how its impact is still felt, how it shaped movements and conversations that are still happening today.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? I mean, from those powerful speeches and calls for change to, like, a whole cultural revolution that changed how Black identity was seen.
It's quite a journey.
It is. But I keep coming back to this question. What's the legacy of Black power? How do we even start to understand its impact on the world today?
That's the part that really gets you thinking, because honestly, the echoes of Black power, They're everywhere. It's not just history. It's part of how our society and politics work.
Yeah, like those ripples we talked about, still spreading out even now.
Exactly. Think about the movements we see today. Black Lives Matter, for example. It has a direct connection to those ideas of self-determination and challenging the system, ideas that were at the heart of Black power.
Wow, yeah, that's a powerful connection. Like those seeds were planted way back in the 60s and they just keep growing in new ways.
It's the power of those ideas, and it's not just activism either. You see the influence of Black power in the arts, music, books. That burst of creativity that came after the movement, it still inspires and challenges artists today.
It's amazing to think how this one phrase, Black power, could have such a huge impact. It really shows you how language can shape how we understand things.
And how it can get people moving, get them to act. You know, the Source podcast doesn't say this outright, but I think Black power really laid the groundwork for movements like Black Lives Matter. It changed the conversation, made a whole generation braver, and people are still inspired by it today.
It makes me wonder, do you think we can even see Barack Obama's election as part of that legacy? I mean, the idea of a Black president was, at one time, unimaginable. But Black power helped break down some of those barriers, didn't it?
It's an interesting thought. While you can't say one directly caused the other, it's clear that Black power changed things politically. It challenged how things were. It demanded that Black people be included. And it helped make our democracy more diverse, more representative of everyone.
It's like this incredible chain reaction that keeps shaping our world. And with everything that's happening today, you know, with the fight for racial justice and equality, understanding what Black power really means feels more important than ever.
Absolutely. It reminds us that fighting for equality never ends. You have to stay aware and be willing to challenge those in power.
This deep dive has been amazing. It's given me so much to think about, and I hope it's done the same for everyone listening.
Me too. Black power was more than just words. It was a movement, a cultural shift, a challenge to America itself. And its impact is still felt in so many ways.
So as we wrap things up, we'll leave you with this question. How do you see Black power showing up in the world today? What can we learn from its history to create a future that's fair for everyone?
That's worth thinking about. And as we keep learning and growing, the legacy of Black power will keep challenging and inspiring us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.